Hey guys, so today I wanted to share with you an excerpt from Susanna Kaysen's Girl Interrupted. Now, some of you may be familiar with the movie Girl Interrupted, which was based off, very loosely, I should say, based off of this book, which I believe had Angelina Jolie and Winona Ryder in it. And whether or not you have seen this movie, I would highly recommend reading this book because, again, even if you have seen the movie, the book is actually far more accurate. The movie, while it's a great movie, I don't consider it to be a good representation of the book. And I will explain to you a little bit more about that after I give you guys some more information. So, this book is actually a memoir. So, it was the woman Susanna Kaysen who wrote it is the main character, and it consists of a set of stories from her time in a psychiatric hospital in the 60s. So, rather than being one long overarching story, there are lots and lots of little stories in there. And she, the writer Susanna Kaysen, was submitted to a psychiatric hospital, McLean Hospital, in 1967 when she was 18 years old. And she spent most of the time there in the ward for young adult teenage girls, just girls her age. And this was, for those who don't know, during a time when a lot of people were being put into these wards. Back when that was, I don't want to say normal, but that was how the problem was dealt with. And that's why there are a lot of other books about this sort of thing. Probably the most famous being One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But it has a very interesting way that she has written it, and I don't know whether that's partly because of her, I don't want to say mental illness, but what she was dealing with at the time, and I don't know whether that could have also just been her personality as she was. But she was diagnosed with what I think still is called borderline personality disorder. I don't know if they have changed the name in the most recent edition of the DSM, but she was diagnosed and then put in there for 2 years. And what makes this book interesting is that they have maintained her records. So you can see throughout the book various forms that have been filled out. It says McLean Hospital, Kaysen, Susanna, just all her information. And yeah, it says borderline personality. Let's see, diagnostic impression at admission. It says psychoneurotic depressive reaction. I don't know if you can quite see that. Personality pattern disturbance, mixed type, RO, undifferentiated schizophrenia. So I don't know if you guys can quite read that right there. And the way of going about this sort of thing is very different than it was, how many years ago was this? 40 years ago. Although, like I said, I do believe the diagnosis of borderline personality still exists. And yeah, I'm just going to read you a few sections to sort of give you an idea of what this is like. So I'll start with the first one. It's called toward a topography of the parallel universe, which is a very good way of describing the way that this ward is described to be. It seems like a parallel universe. People ask, how did you get in there? What they really want to know is if they are likely to end up in there as well. I can't answer the real question. All I can tell them is, it's easy. And it is easy to slip into a parallel universe. There are so many of them. Worlds of the insane, the criminal, the crippled, the dying, perhaps of the dead as well. These worlds exist alongside this world and resemble it, but are not in it. My roommate Georgina came in swiftly and totally during her junior year at Vassar. She was in a theater watching a movie when a tidal wave of blackness broke over her head. The entire world was obliterated, for a few minutes. She knew she had gone crazy. She looked around the theater to see if it had happened to everyone, but all the other people were engrossed in the movie. She rushed out, because the darkness in the theater was too much when combined with the darkness in her head. And after that, I asked her. A lot of darkness, she said. But most people pass over incrementally, making a series of perforations in the membrane between here and there until an opening exists. And who can resist an opening? In the parallel universe, the laws of physics are suspended. What goes up does not necessarily come down. A body at rest does not tend to stay at rest, and not every action can be counted on to provoke an equal and opposite reaction. Time, too, is different. It may run in circles, flow backward, skip out from now to then. The very arrangement of molecules is fluid. Tables can be clocks, faces, flowers. There are facts you find out later, though. Another odd feature of the parallel universe is that although it is invisible from this side, once you are in it, you can easily see the world you came from. Sometimes the world you came from looks huge and menacing, quivering like the vast pile of jelly. At other times it is miniaturized and alluring, a spin, a shining in its orbit. Either way, it can't be discounted. Every window on Alcatraz has a view of San Francisco. Sorry about that, I was interrupted. But anyway, you can see by the passage that I just read what I meant about how her perspective is sort of different. The way she says that molecules are fluid, tables can be clocks, faces, flowers, that time runs differently, the way she describes it as a parallel universe. The next passage is not one that I find super interesting to read, to be honest. It's just sort of a establishing passage describing when she first went to the doctor, and the doctor decided that he said, you need a rest, is what he says exactly. And she's thinking, yeah, I'm pretty tired. And then he says, like, oh, you need a rest. Here, I've got a bed for you. It'll be a rest. Just a couple of weeks, okay? And then he sends her off to McLean Hospital. And after this, they have some more of her papers. I can't entirely read. They've blacked out important information, as you can tell, which, I mean, of course they did. But let me see. Needed McLean for 3 years, profoundly depressed, suicidal, increasing patternlessness of life, promiscuous, might kill self or get pregnant, ran away from home 4 months ago. I can't read a lot of that, but yeah, they've basically scanned these documents and straight up stuck them in this book. Here, the next one is typed up. It's to some doctor from some other doctor. Susanna Kaysen was seen by me on April 27th, 1967, following my evaluation, which extended over 3 hours. I referred her to McLean Hospital for admission. My decision was based on 1. the chaotic, unplanned life of the patient at present with progressive decompensation and reversal of sleep cycle. 2. Severe depression and hopelessness and suicidal ideas. 3. History of suicidal attempts. 4. No therapy and no plan at present. Immersion in fantasy, progressive withdrawal, and isolation. The patient had been seen in psychotherapy by Dr. someone. At no time did I have her in therapy, and the patient knew that I was not a potential therapist. So, anyway, this was, I assume, written written by the doctor who admitted her, as opposed to the therapist who suggested that she go. But it gives you a good idea for her mental state, and that's why I became really interested in reading these sort of papers, because I initially read this book in high school, and at the time I wanted to be a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist. And so this insight into this world was sort of exciting, to not only hear the story and, read the stories like I had, and I read also One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in high school, so that was another sort of insight, but here it was something that had actually happened, where I could actually see all of these forms that had been filled out, all of these, psychiatric evaluations and stuff like that, it sort of made it more real for me to see all of this. But anyway, I am going to read you, I think, the next bit, which is not about Susanna, but about one of the other girls who was in the hospital with her, who was in her ward. And that's another thing that I find interesting, is the description of all of the other people who were in this ward with her. From, in the first bit, she described her best friend, was it Georgina? Yeah, Georgina. She described Georgina, she describes this girl, I think in this one it's Polly. She describes Lisa and sort of what they were like, and in some cases, in many cases, what got them in here, as well as, little details about what they were like before, what they were like when they're in there. And yeah, so this passage is called Fire. One girl among us had set herself on fire. She used gasoline. She was too young to drive at the time. I wondered how she had gotten hold of it. Had she walked to her neighborhood garage and told them her father's car had run out of gas? I couldn't look at her without thinking about it. I guess I should probably give you a trigger warning for this in case you get freaked out, because there's some description of the results of this. Sorry. I think the gasoline had settled in her collarbones, forming pools there beside her shoulders, because her neck and cheeks were scarred the most. The scars were thick ridges, alternating bright pink and white in stripes from up her neck. They were so tough and wide that she couldn't turn her head, but had to swivel her entire upper torso if she wanted to see a person standing next to her. Scar tissue has no character. It's not like skin. It doesn't show age or illness or pallor or tan. It has no pores, no hair, no wrinkles. It's like a slipcover. It shields and disguises what's beneath. That's why we grow it. We have something to hide. Her name was Polly. This name must have seemed ridiculous to her in the days or months when she was planning to set herself on fire, but it suited her well in her slip-covered survivor life. She was never unhappy. She was kind and comforting to those who were unhappy. She never complained. She always had the time to listen to other people's complaints. She was faultless in her impermeable tight pink and white casing. Whatever had driven her whispered "die" in her once perfect, now scarred ear. She had immolated it. Why did she do it? Nobody knew. Nobody dared to ask, because what courage? Who had the courage to burn herself? 20 aspirin, a little slit alongside the veins of the arm, maybe even a bad half-hour standing on the roof. We've all had those. And somewhat more dangerous things, like putting a gun in your mouth. But you put it there, you taste it, it's cold and greasy, your finger is on the trigger, and you find that a whole world lies between this moment and the moment you've been planning when you'll pull the trigger. That world defeats you. Put the gun back in the drawer. You'll have to find another way. What was that moment like for her? The moment she lit the match. Had she already tried roofs and guns and aspirin, or was it just an inspiration? I had an inspiration once. I woke up one morning and I knew that today I had to swallow 50 aspirin. It was my task, my job for the day. I lined them up on my desk and took them one by one, counting. But it's not the same as what she did. I could have stopped at 10 or at 30, and I could have done what I did do, which is go out onto the street and faint. 50 aspirin is a lot of aspirin, but going onto the street and fainting is like putting the gun back in the drawer. She lit the match. Where? In the garage at home, where she wouldn't set anything else on fire? Out in a field? In the high school gym? In an empty swimming pool? Somebody found her, but not for a while. Who would guess a person like that? A person with no skin? She was 18 before this thought occurred to her. She'd spent a year with us. Other people stormed and screamed and cringed and cried. Polly watched and smiled. She sat by people who were frightened at her presence, and her presence calmed them. Her smile wasn't mean, it was understanding. Life was hellish, she knew that, but her smile hinted she'd burned all that out of her. Her smile was a little bit superior. We wouldn't have the courage to burn it out of ourselves, but she understood that too. Everyone was different. People just did what they could. One morning somebody was crying, but mornings were often noisy. Fights about getting up on time and complaints about nightmares. Polly was so quiet, so unobtrusive a presence that we didn't notice she wasn't at breakfast. After breakfast, we could still hear crying. Who's crying? Nobody knew. And at lunch there was still crying. It's Polly, said Lisa, who knew everything. Why? But even Lisa didn't know why. At dusk, the crying changed to screaming. Dusk is a dangerous time. At first she screamed, "Ah!" and "Ee!" Then she started to scream words. "My face! My face! My face!" We could hear other voices shushing her, murmuring comfort, but she continued to scream her 2 words long into the night. Lisa said, "Well, I've been expecting this for a while." And then I think we all realized what fools we'd been. We might get out sometime, but she was locked up forever in that body. I think that chapter has always sort of stood out for me because it's somewhat haunting in a sense. It starts out with this character who, in this world, in this parallel universe, is so kind, so well respected, so seemingly sane. You know, she's described as unobtrusive. It says she's never the one crying. Her kind presence, stuff like that. We all know people like that. And then it ends with this idea that, as she says, she would forever be trapped in that body of hers because of what she had done to herself. The same act that made people respect her so much is what in the outside world will kind of leave her shunned. Sorry about all the noise and disruptions, but I think I will have to end this here. It's already a pretty long video, but again, highly recommended, especially for anyone who is interested in psychology or mental health or anything to that effect. Very well written, very interesting dynamic characters, and I know people always say the book is better, but in this case, the book is really better. After seeing what they did with the movie, it's upsetting to think that they took the story of someone's life, of multiple people's lives, and changed it for the sake of Hollywood. Especially when the way that the script was written in the movie made it far less accurate and, less realistic, which is, at least for me, what drew me to this book, is the realism in it. So, there we go. That's what I have to say about Girl Interrupted. I will see you guys next time.